There we go. Hey everyone, I'm Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Test Automation Services. We focus on test automation. We do that by helping companies with consulting, training, and dedicated experts. And recently, we've been working on IT staffing and recruiting as well. So if you need contractors as test automation engineers, as developers, as program managers, as project managers, as business analysts, give us a yell. We'd love to help. So a couple points of order before I get going here. Number one, we are going to be talking about advanced topics in Robot Framework and integrating Python functions with our Robot Framework tests. As we go along, you'll notice that you have the opportunity to type in questions and to chat. If you'd use the questions box to type in questions, that would be great. Usually we don't have people come online and speak. You're all muted right now, and we'll continue that. But when you have questions, type them in, and I'll try to take a break at the end and give you plenty of time to type those questions. You're welcome to do that as we go along as well. So I'm glad you're all here. If somebody could just give me a heads up in the questions area and make sure that you can see the main screen here, that would be great. It looks like it's fine to me, but I want to make sure that you're all good. So I see Pradeep says hi. So it looks like the questions are working. Hopefully you all can see the screen as well. So this is going to be mostly a demo. And as we go through it, I'm going to pull up my code. I see a bunch of yeses now. So that's great. Thank you all very much for your response. I'm going to be doing mostly a demo. I'll give a little bit of a heads up as to what we're going to be talking about and when we should do this. Most of this is based on a new course that I have, a free Robot Framework course that's out at Test Automation U. So if you don't know about Test Automation U, you should go to testautomationu.com. That is a wonderful site for learning more about test automation, completely free. You can learn all kinds of skills and up your game. A lot of you have already taken the course that I have out there on Robot Framework. It is an introduction to Robot Framework, and it's gotten pretty good reviews so far. I'd love to hear more feedback from it if you all have that. This is thought of as kind of an add-on to that. So a few more advanced topics that we didn't get to go into while we were in that course. No need to know Python today. No need to know Robot Framework today. I'll try to make this a gentle introduction as much as I can, but just understand we are kind of building on the information that most of us already know with Robot Framework. You see my Twitter handle here at dpaulmerrill. I'd love for you to follow me there, and feel free to tweet during this. Anytime. I love seeing the tweets afterwards and hearing what people thought was interesting for this webinar. If you're new with this is what I call the B list. It's the Beaufort Fairmont list of people who have been helpful and that I really appreciate in the last month or so. If you see a name up there that looks like yours and that last initial is yours, it's probably you. I always miss people on this. I apologize if I missed you or missed someone else, but thank you so much to the folks who have helped out. One of them, I actually, several of them I see on here right now, so I'm glad you're here. And you know, even there are people on here for all different reasons. There are folks that have done something nice. They've referred business to us. They've just said, hey, look, your program, your webinar was really good, or can we talk about topics X, Y, and Z? There are folks who, for instance, found a bug in something. Maybe it was in one of my repos for some of this work in GitLab.com or GitHub. There are people who found bugs in the new course from Test Automation U. Whatever it is, I appreciate your help. There are people who have just answered questions or done nice things like retweeted things for me. Lately, a few things. I mentioned the Test Automation U course. If you haven't done it yet, go sign up, take it. It's 1 hour long. It'll get you up to speed with Robot Framework, which is a fun tool to use. AI and testing. I've written 2 articles lately on TechBeacon. If you're not familiar with TechBeacon, you should get familiar with TechBeacon. TechBeacon.com has tons of great material from some of the leading experts, industry experts in the testing world. They asked me to write a piece on resources for testing in AI, or AI testing. So I came up with 13 resources. Some of those are just to get you used to the idea of AI and what it can do. Some of them are how you use AI in testing, and some of them are other tools, educational tools, resources that you can use, things like that. There's another article on there in Getting Used to AI. It's all about what you should know about AI and testing. So take a look at that as well. If you haven't taken the plunge yet, it's time to take the plunge. The industry is to this point. They're getting ready to use AI in testing. Still don't think it's going to take all of our jobs anytime soon, but someday maybe. So I'll also be on the Tipsy Tester sometime in September. We're locking down a date right now. I need to get back with them for a date actually, but let's hope I can find some scotch before that date and get really tipsy and tell you what I really think about testing. Wouldn't that be fun? So I think they're going for a little bit of a drunken history vibe there. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, make sure to check that out. And if you haven't seen one of those before, they're really fun to watch. You guys know we're doing more staffing and recruiting lately. If you're looking for a job, this is what our page looks like. GopherFairmont.com/jobs. Almost all of these are US only. They're mostly remote positions. Go click on one and apply. Two of the newer ones are the Director of Quality Engineering and this automation engineer second to the bottom, or actually the second to the top, test automation engineer JavaScript. So make sure to take a look at those. And I try to update that, or we try to update that pretty often. So keep an eye out on that page. I mentioned recruiting and staffing. If you have positions, please make sure to send them our way. We'd love to help you out. So with that, I say we get started. What do you say? So hopefully everybody pretty much knows what Robot Framework is and has worked on it before. They've seen kind of what it does. If you haven't, I'm going to get into some examples very quickly. Basically, the idea is that Robot Framework is a keyword-based tool. Some of you hear keyword and you think of the old Excel spreadsheet keyword-based test automation. It's not what it is. It's based in keywords, which are almost like functions or methods within Robot Framework. Robot Framework is text-based, which means that you can make it look very human readable. So you can write automated test scripts in human readable form, and that does a number of things. It puts you in the position to make sure that everyone on the team can read a test case and understand what's going on, as opposed to sometimes with code. Code can be a little bit exclusive because not everybody can read code. With well-written Robot Framework test scripts, it's easy to look at the script for most people when they're written well and understand exactly what's going on and what's being tested. That's one of the biggest benefits that I see with Robot Framework. It's very approachable. I don't think that it's something that really turns people off the same way that sometimes code can. So those are a couple of things about Robot Framework. They're based in, it's based in Python. You can use a number of different languages with it. You can do all different types of testing and really plug in just about anything you want. It's being used a lot for robotic process automation right now. We're going to talk specifically about the idea of tying directly in with Python functions or methods and classes. And the reason that I'm going to get into that is because it is so helpful and it can be so easy to do. What I find the most with the teams that we work with on this is that because Robot Framework is relatively easy to pick up, we can take people who haven't written a bunch of automation and have them starting to write automation by writing Robot Framework scripts. Many times we'll have another group of folks, maybe they're automation engineers, maybe they're your developers, and they're writing the keywords that work for this. Sometimes those keywords are built into Robot Framework, and I'm going to show you an example in just a minute of that. Sometimes they can be written in a programming language. And the idea is, how do we know what to do each? How do we know when to do each? So the two situations are these. Number one, the situation, and this slide didn't get updated, I'm realizing. The two situations are basically, number one, when you have to tie into the system under test and you want to do that through a programming language. So let's say you wanted to write integration tests and you could tie directly in through code, Python, Java, C#, the .NET stack, JavaScript, a lot of these different languages. Or number two, you wanted to do something unique and interesting with your test case. So either you're writing test automation code or you're writing tying into the system under test. Either one of those two situations works well. When to use programming language for a keyword these are the things that I would say. These are the things that I would say we should be looking for. So number one would be the case when it's easier, quicker, or clearer to write in a programming language. So for instance, let's say that you have a lot of logic within a particular keyword in Robot Framework, and it's big and it's ugly and it's hard to understand. Maybe writing it in Python or in Java or something else would be easier. That might be a good time to do it. When you get really long keywords, that's another time. The control structures within Robot Framework leave a little bit to be desired. I feel like I'm no one to complain about anyone else's tool. I haven't written a tool like this myself, so I hate to criticize. But when I look at the control structures in Robot Framework, they're ugly. They're kind of hard to use. They don't have all the functionality of a programming language. And I also don't think they're supposed to be fair. They're there, they can be used, but when you start getting into control structures, that's usually the point where I say, hey, let's write some code. And those control structures are things like conditionals, if, else, then, those types of cases. Another would be loops. So if you're trying to do something more than one time, finally things like switch statements and such. Those are times when I would say, let's get out of Robot Framework and move into a programming language since it's built for that. Unit or integration testing, I mentioned. Now look, I'm a strong believer, if I have the luxury of my beliefs, of developers writing unit tests. I really like that. There are times though, when a developer could open their code base up through a publicly exposed method to Robot Framework and allow testers to write some unit tests too. And that can be very helpful. So there are lots of different ways to use this tool. Some are good in some situations, some are not so good in other situations. It really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What if you have no UI yet, but you have some type of logic that needs to be implemented? I've seen this a lot of different times. Many times developers will write the logic for something, but we have no way to interact with it, no interface at all, not even a RESTful interface, right? You can tie directly into the code with that and test it. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Paul, you're talking too much. There's a bunch of words, bullet points, slides. Let's look at this. I'm right there with you. Let's do it. I'm going to drop out of the view mode. You're not going to be seeing me from this point forward. And I'm going to share my screen again, but it's hopefully you're seeing VS Code. Let's see. It looks like that's what you're seeing. So if there are any troubles, let me know. And of course, as we go through this, if there's any trouble hearing me, any trouble with at all, just let me know. First and foremost, this might look a little bit like programming to you all. It's not actual programming, but it might look a little bit like that. So this is what a Robot Framework file might look like. We have a settings section, we have a test cases section, we have certain tools that we're pulling in this case, a library. We have certain test cases. They're left justified. You see them highlighted here in purple. Addition should work. I'll show you a couple others of these as well. Here's another example of what a Robot Framework, let's see, not that one. There we go. What a Robot Framework test case might look like. And hopefully you can see my screen okay and the font is all right here. All right, get rid of that. So once again, this one is a little bit bigger. It's got a lot more settings. It's got one test case here. It's called create an invoice. It's for an application called invoicing. It's an invoicing application. And it's got some keywords. So your keywords are things like navigate to add invoice, fill out invoice details, submit invoice form. Those are all keywords, and these are customized keywords. This is a one that's built into the system. Page should contain. I have a couple people here asking about some of the, and I'm having trouble actually looking at answers or looking at the questions that people are asking. There we go. That'll work. I'm not gonna drill down into how Robot Framework works right now. I'm giving you a high-level overview. If you want to know how it works, I would strongly suggest looking at the course on Test Automation U. It's a 1 hour long free course. I go into all the details of how Robot Framework works, and you get to do it on your own and learn as we go. but I can't go into all the details on how this works at the moment. So that's why there's an hour of that. And we also have a 5-day course to really teach Robot Framework for folks, for teams and corporations and things like that. So this is just an example. You get the idea here. It's doing a bunch of stuff. You also may notice that we're using a Selenium library. This one goes in and starts using Selenium and driving the web browser, which is pretty cool. So lots of things that you can do with Robot Framework. You don't have to do UI testing. This is not really what I want to show you. I want to show you about Python and how we can use Python in one of our tests. I brought this up earlier and I'm coming back to it. What we're going to do here is we're going to use a Python program and we're going to call into it. We're going to use the Python program so that you can see how these things are tied together. The Python program is a calculator. And this is it on my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see this. If you can't, please let me know. What we're, and I'm just trying to clean up some of my comments here. This is a function and it's just written directly into a Python file. So a Python file is a text file. It's usually got a .py extension. Here, this one's called calculator.py. It's supposed to calculate things. This first function, you may have guessed, it defines a function called add, and it takes in 2 parameters, A and B. And what we do is we add A to B, and we return that to whatever's calling it. If you're not familiar with how a function works, if this is new to you, it's okay. You can always come back, look at the recording, and you may want to go and look at a little bit of Python or do an intro to Python course as well. But the idea is basically this thing right here is called add. It takes in 2 values, it adds them together, and it gives you an answer. That's the base level of what you need to understand. This one, so I'm going to put both of these up at the same time. Here's, oops. This is our Robot Framework file, this .robot file here. Just a little more space there. So this robot file would be a test case or a test suite. And in order to use this calculator.py, I have to basically do what's called importing it or use it as a library. In this case, what I did was I used it from the local directory, and you guys may have seen this here. It's located right here in this local directory, the calculator.py, the same place as the test file that we're in. So I can use the / to access it. So I'm using the calculator.py file, this one over here. Then I wrote a test case, addition should work. And all I have to do to use that function is just use it as if it's a keyword. That's cool, right? That's cool. We call add, we're passing in this value A, we're giving it the value 1, that variable A, we're giving B the value of 4, and then it's going to add those together and give us a number, and we're expecting it to equal 4, right? Of course. So let's see how that works. I'm going to pull up a terminal, and this is a good time if you have questions, go ahead and ask them now. And let me try to figure out where I'm supposed to be here. I think it's exercise 35. Some of you may recognize this directory structure from the course on Test Automation U. I've added a few things in here just to be able to do this today with you. And I type robot import local library .robot, and it runs. So if you're familiar with Robot Framework, this looks really natural to you. If you're not, I'll tell you what we're doing. So we use the command robot. Robot Framework is installed on my machine. The command to use Robot Framework and run a test case is called robot. The file that we're running is import local library.robot. We see that right here. This is the test case that we're going to run. And then we get some output when it runs. And that output looks like this. The output tells us the name of the file or test suite. It gives us next the name of the test case that we're going to run. So addition should work. We know that that's the name of it. And it gives us a pass because we went through this without an error, without a failure. The place where we're verifying something is this line right here on line 14. And this verification is saying, okay, what is the result of adding 1 and 4? Put it into this variable that looks really ugly, $, open curly, result, close curly, ugly. Put it into result, and then compare result to 5. They should be equal. And you notice I got really lazy here and didn't do my case sensitivity properly. Let me fix that, and it still works. That's interesting. So a variable is not case sensitive. Good to know. But it worked. These two things compared, and they worked. So what if, and go ahead and start typing questions if you have them now. This is a good time to ask. I feel a little bit alone here. I'm a little worried that I'm the only one here. But what if we tried subtraction? Would it work? What do you think? Would it work if I just changed the keyword to subtraction? No. And someone says, maybe I'm getting confused. So someone asked about, this is a good question. Thank you very much, Pradeep. Maybe I'm confused, but is Robot Framework an alternative to the page object model or screenplay pattern? No, that's a wonderful question. Robot Framework does a lot of different things. You could think of it as like one way to write test cases. Many times people are used to writing test cases in Selenium, which is one way to interact with a browser. They're used to writing them in some tool that only does browser interactions or does API interactions or things like that. Robot Framework is kind of a level above that. It gives you the ability to write human readable stuff, and then it allows you to tie it in with just about anything. So we could tie this in with all different kinds of things. We could tie it in with Selenium or API testing or whatever else, and there are libraries for that. Make sure to go back and look at the Test Automation View course, because that's where you'll learn the most about what I just said there. So just quickly getting back here, is this going to work? A lot of people say no. So the reason is, and someone says, this is good. So Gaurav, I apologize if I got your name wrong, but Gaurav says, no, you need a Python function. Well, you're exactly right, but let's be really silly and run this and see what happens. Okay, so here we go. It says no keyword with name subtraction found, and we see failed. So this is the kind of error message you're going to get when you can't find the keyword that you want. So this keyword that I'm trying to use, subtraction, it doesn't exist over here in Python or anywhere else in what Robot Framework can use. So we would have to create it. And I'm going to be really lazy. And I'm going to just copy what we had and change it to subtract. Subtract. Someone saw that and was like, Paul, it says subtract. Very good. You win for the day. 500 points for you. So subtract, except it's supposed to be subtraction, right? And I like the verb. I like subtract. So let's fix both of these. Subtract. Now, if I run it, what's going to happen? I would hope it would work, and it did, right? It did. So subtraction should work. Now we could do that for everything. We could go through and let's just very quickly create a test case for multiplication and division, okay? Multiplication should work. Division should work. Let's see if your eyes are faster than my typing. Divide. Oops, good call. You found that one. You noticed multiply, divide. And what's the answer here? Multiply should give us 4. Is that correct? Division should give us, 4 divided by 1 is 4. 4 multiplied by, yeah, those would both be 4, right? Looks right to me. Doesn't matter. I'm going to test it in just a minute anyway, and it'll tell me. So we get failed because, again, multiply isn't found, divide isn't found, so let's create those. And subtract, we're going to multiply. I promise you, typing in front of other people is much harder than typing on your own. And then thinking and talking, that's another thing too. That's a tough thing. So let's just see what happens. Did I get it right? I did. Awesome. I like it when things work. So multiplication and division both work there because we just wrote it. Now, what you just saw me do is the basis of test-driven development. If you guys aren't familiar with that, the idea that I could write a test case, right? We wrote the test cases for multiply and divide. They failed because we didn't have the functions yet. And then I created the functions and then they passed. That's exactly what test-driven development is, except usually developers will do it in code instead of this way. So you can see how I could write test cases before I had the code there. That's not a function of Robot Framework. That's just one method of writing things. Let's see if there are some other comments here as we're going along. So Pradeep says, yeah, so Gherkin is an alternative. You know what? I think of Cucumber and Robot Framework and Gauge as test drivers. I call them test drivers. So they drive test cases, and they give us the ability to write things in a human readable form, business domain, you know, something along those lines, something human readable. So yes, I think of Robot Framework as being an alternative to Cucumber or SpecFlow or something along those lines, or Gauge. I wouldn't say it's an alternative to Gherkin. You could use Robot Framework to write Gherkin if you wanted. It might be a little bit ugly, but certainly you could go in and say given, when, then in here and create your keywords for that. But that's a good question as well. Thank you so much. So let's do this. We've gone through one example of creating a calculator, but that's pretty boring. So let's take things up a notch. Who can define what a leap year is? Who can define what a leap year is? Let's see who can do it. There's 100 points on the line for this one. Pradeep is all over the questions today. You guys are going to have to step it up. Pradeep is really doing great. So, so let's see. Pradeep says 366 days. I don't know that that's. Oh, I see. So you're saying how long is a leap year? Yes, 366 days would be how long it is. But how do we define what a leap year is? So I hear John saying divisible by 4, but not by 100. The years divided by 4K. You know, and this is interesting too, because some of you lived through the year 2000 as a professional, and some of you didn't. And if you lived through the year 2000, you probably encountered this problem, that it's not as simple as divisible by 4, and it's not as simple, if I remember, John, as being not 100. But in the year 2000, it was something along the lines of it was every 4 years, but not 100, but every 500 or something along those lines. And so I had to go out and find the code for this so that we could all talk about it together. So here is the code that I found out there. So basically it's saying, and I'm going to make this a little easier to view here. This is the code in Python where someone had figured this out, and I wanted to give them credit. It's from beginnersbook.com, Python programming check leap year or not. Yeah, so basically, if the year is divisible by 4, wow, look at that. Ashish went out and found something very close as well. If the year is divisible by 4, that's what this part means, and the year is not divisible by 100, that's what John got both of those, then it's true. But if the year is divisible by 400, then it's true. That's one of the ones we found out in the year 2000. That was interesting. So, that's how we do it. So what I wanted to do here was build in a test and find out, tying into this Python file, how we find out if a year is a leap year. So you'll see in Python that we have a function. So in Python, there are methods and functions. A function is just like this. There's no class wrapped around it. A method has a class wrapped around it. The way that Robot Framework interacts with these is basically a Python file has to be in the Python path. And what that is the path that's automatically loaded into Robot Framework, the Python path that's loaded into Robot Framework when it starts. You can also set an environment variable, and you can also add it at the command line. And I had an example of this that I wanted to show you all really quickly as well, if you'll just bear with me. So what you could do is you could set the Python path with a command like this, robot -- Python path, the actual path, not the not the greater than less than sign, and then the file that you're going to run. And then you can just use a library without that / because the path would have been set with this flag, right? So there's a couple different ways to do that. So any kind of Python file you can use. One of the things to know about Python, if you're not comfortable or not familiar with Python, is that Python has a much looser interpretation of scope than other programming languages. So if you're a Java programmer or a C# programmer, you know public, private, protected, you know these things, package, you know about scope, access levels. If you're in Python, basically everything is public. So this function is public, meaning that anything outside of this file, anything inside or outside of this file can use it. If you're in Java and you have a public method, it's something that can be used outside of a class. In Python, if you have methods within a class as opposed to a function in a file, you can kind of sort of do some things with protection. Rather, that's variables, not methods. I don't think you can do anything with methods there. If you're in Java, it's a whole different world. If you're in C#, you can make it so that nobody can access those methods using private or protected or whatever else, or certain people can use them. So what Robot Framework does, just getting back to the point, is saying anything that's publicly accessible in your file or your class can be used automatically as a keyword, provided you import it, which is what we do right here. We imported that file, and you call that function or method appropriately. In this case, it was add. We gave it the appropriate arguments and it worked. So let's try it again with leap year. So first of all, we know that we've got this leap year.py file. It defines what a leap year is. It has a function called isLeapYear. It takes a year in as a parameter. So we import it with the library step, library keyword. That's going to say, okay, give us the ability to use isLeapYear. We create a test case, 2016 should be a leap year. IsLeapYear is the keyword that we use. It's exactly the same as what we see here in Python. We pass in the year, which is 2016, and we're going to check it using a built-in keyword called should be true. So we're going to check this result that we get back to see if it's true. What do you all think? Do you think it's going to work? Let's see if it works. Let's see what happens. And it did work. So it passed. So that's pretty cool. But you know what? With my test automation, one of my major things to do is to write a negative test case to test whether or not my keywords work properly. So I'm going to make a negative test case called 2015 should not be a leap year. And then we should be false, right? So we could do that way. Uh-oh. Should be true. Maybe there's a should not. Should not be true. Is that what the other keyword is, folks? There it is. Should not be true. So that worked. We could do this negative test case another way and just watch it fail, right? So we could say should be true, and we're expecting the second test case to fail, and it did. So we know this code is working as we expected, at least with those two things. So I'm starting to see some questions here. Keep them coming. This may be a little bit of a shorter webinar here than we've done in the past. The idea that I wanted to get across here was that you can tie in directly with Python from a Robot Framework test case. You can do that in a couple different ways. Forgot to turn off my phone. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can do it with a number of different languages. So Robot Framework will also work with Java. So you could write test cases, or sorry, you could write code in Java. And the way that works is it goes through Jython in order to get over to Java. I don't know all the details of that. The other thing that I can tell you is that it'll work through IronPython in order to access C# and .NET type libraries. There's also a remote library which gives you the opportunity to tie into different processes and makes it so that basically you can use any language you want. So if your team does Java and they want to write keywords in Java, they can do that. If your team works in C# and they want to write keywords in C#, they can do that. There's just a lot of ability there. While you're thinking of questions and typing them in, I want to do another thing, which is I'd like to show you a little bit, if I can find it, a little bit about those situations where you might want to do this. So one situation would be if we're using a bunch of conditionals, is one that I mentioned, a bunch of control structures. So a loop is one kind of control structure. A loop allows you to do the same thing over and over and over again. In Robot Framework, it might look like this, okay? So we have a for loop here, and we say for every animal in the list of cat and dog, so it's going to go through this twice, then we're going to log out the name of the animal. And then we're going to log something when I'm done, and there's an end. So to me, this is just ugly. It's just ugly. And once again, that's purely aesthetics. The fact that we're able to do these types of things in Robot Framework is awesome. And if someone hasn't ever programmed before, or for whatever reason this makes really good sense for them to do in their situation, that's fine. What I find is that generally when you have a lot of these types of statements, it makes the test case or the keyword really difficult to read, really difficult to understand, and sometimes really hard to write and debug. And I find that programming languages in those cases are generally better for those keywords. So I'm going to start trying to dig into a couple of questions here as we're talking. It looks like, yeah. So Honey has a question about Robot Framework keywords are based on Python. Why would I use Robot Framework for API testing when a user can do it directly through Python? That's a great question. So why would we use Robot Framework for any kind of test as opposed to the programming language itself? You know, the reason would be, once again, I've seen tremendous benefit from many different clients of being able to write a test case in a human readable format. Robot Framework gives you that. It also gives you some really good or better reporting than we have with some other tools. So once again, this sounds like a question that's answered by my class on test automation use. So make sure to go out there and see that, Honey. But when you look at the results here, just built into Robot Framework, you have a nice, clear report that's read because something failed. You can drill down into the test cases and every single keyword. I'm going to make this a little bigger because I think that's probably hard to read, but it makes it really easy to go in and look at each keyword that happened, what the results were, how long they took, which test case failed, which step in which test case failed, what the actual result was. So it was false instead of true. That's why I would say that, Honey. And usually what I see is that programmers say, oh, just use the programming. That's fine. You can use programming. If your testers understand programming, that's great. Many times testers don't have the ability to read programming, or they don't want to read programming, or it's not natural to them. Your product owners would most of the time be the same. So I'll leave that as an answer. I hope that helps you see things maybe a different way. So these tests you were doing, are they considered unit tests? Yeah, these would probably be considered unit tests. And once again, I'm not saying that testers should do unit testing for developers in all cases. I'm not saying that they should in your case. I don't know what your case is. But it can be very helpful in some cases for people who are not able to write code or who don't want to write code, access code and determine if it's right or not. One case is when you're trying to sync up dev and testing in agile environments. How many folks have follow-on testing sprints? It doesn't keep everything in sync. It elongates things. It makes things take a lot longer with regard to getting things out to production. So there are a lot of reasons to do this. You don't have to do this with unit tests though. You can tie it in with all different types of testing. End-to-end UI, API service level test. You can interact with any different piece of a system for the most part. Anything you can code, you could interact with Robot Framework. So, and Pradeep, I see you have a number of other questions. I'm going to put you on hold, on timeout for the rest of the time. I've got some other questions to get to, but thank you for all your questions so far. Errol, let's see. So Errol asks, so true and should be true as a keyword, not a constant. Can it be a constant? This is another place where that's some information that's covered in the course, the Test Automation U course. But to briefly go through, I think you're talking about this keyword should be true and what's a constant, what's not. There are different keywords in Robot Framework that we can use. Many of them are built in. And let me just see if I can find the documentation for that really quick. Built in Robot Framework library. There we go, Robot Framework. Here's the built-in library. And you'll notice should be true. Here's that keyword, and we can go in and look at how it works. So you've got lots of different keywords there, Errol. The idea is that it's like a function name. It's like a method name is what a keyword name is, right? Should be true. It's not about a constant or a variable with the word true. It's a part of that keyword. Could you do this with a constant for true? Yes, you could do should be equals, I guess, should be equal. I would have to look into this and see if you can use you could use a string literal constant, the string true, and then compare it to another string false. But the method that you're using has to return a string true or a string false, or you would have to convert it to a string somewhere, somehow. So good question. Not sure if I am able to answer it as you'd like, but that's the answer I have today. Let's see. Yeah, so another question. Someone asks, does Robot Framework work with mobile app testing and API testing also? Yes, you can tie in just about anything else you could do. So I would imagine that you could, if you can find a library for mobile testing in Python or in Java, something like Appium you could use in Java. So you could expose that to Robot Framework, and yes, theoretically you could do that. You can pretty much do anything. It's just a matter of how much time and money you want to spend to do it. But I don't know of the libraries for mobile app testing right off the top of my head. I would think you could use Appium as one example. API testing, yes, of course. I say of course because the libraries are well known to me. There's a requests library, as someone mentioned earlier, in Python. You could use that. You could also use Karate, which is a library within Robot Framework specifically for REST API testing, which would be another great option. And we've got some time here, so I'm just going to answer questions. So you guys keep them coming, okay? Or you folks keep them coming. Let's see. Can keywords have spaces? For instance, second keyword. Yeah, this is a great question. Once again, go do the 1-hour course on Robot Framework, and you will know all the answers to this. One of our keywords right here, this is from Raghu. Raghu, it has spaces in it. You notice that it's should space be space true, right? So yes, it can have spaces. The way that we delineate keywords and variables and arguments in Robot Framework is by 2 or more spaces. And if you got the certification from Test Automation U, you would have found that already because you had to answer to get the certification. But go back and get that because now you have a free answer right there, Raghu. So let's see. Steve, so Steve Y asks, what are the advantages of Robot Framework over Cucumber and what are the significant disadvantages? So I guess I would, that's a good question. The advantages I see with Robot Framework would be number one, it's more freeform. If you need to be more freeform and not locked into the given, when, then format, this is one way to do that. I personally don't have if I have my own personal desires, I don't necessarily need to have given, when, then. There's a lot of ways to explain those types of things. I don't need those particular names, but they're very comforting for a lot of people and they help a lot of people by providing some structure that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be there. So there are benefits to each of those. Robot Framework and Cucumber, I guess one of the other things is that there are a number of different implementations of Cucumber out there for different languages. You have the same implementation of Robot Framework across all the languages here. So for instance, in the Gherkin BDD Cucumber world, you've got SpecFlow for C#, which is a different interpreter and tool and reporting mechanism and everything else, then Cucumber, which is for Ruby, and then you've got Cucumber JVM, which is a port over to Java, and I don't even know what else. But you've got one implementation at this level for Robot Framework as opposed to many for different languages on the other, which just talking that out makes me realize, hey, you could use tools from all different languages within the same scripts, I would think, same script or scripts in Robot Framework, which might be interesting if you needed to. Let's see, some other questions. Thanks for your question, Steve. Is it possible to use Robot Framework with PyTest? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, my understanding, I think, is that PyTest is just a library like any other library in Python. And so you could have access to the functionality from PyTest if you wanted to. I think you'd be duplicating efforts. I'm not sure why a person would do that, but I don't see why you couldn't do it. And just because I don't see why doesn't mean that there's not a good reason. There very, very much could be a good reason. I'm sure you have one. Let's see, Huang asked, can this be used at integration system level? Yeah, absolutely. And the second part of your question we answered, which was Robot Framework versus Cucumber. And finally about Jenkins. So CI/CD, yes, there are a number of plugins for Robot Framework, and Jenkins specifically. There are some with other tools as well. I believe there's an output in Robot Framework, an output format that is the XUnit or JUnit XML format, JUnit XML format, which is the one that many of the reporting tools for automation use in the CI world. So that gets you anywhere you need to go in terms of reporting. The other thing with the plugin specifically for Jenkins, because I've used that one and you asked about it, Huang, would be one of the plugins, as I remember, for this, with those two tools, allowed you to directly tie in to these reports and show them easily in your CI/CD system. And you know, we've talked about this before. Sometimes reading through the questions and being able to repeat them and understand them, sometimes that takes me a few seconds. So thank you for your patience. Being the MC and the presenter can be a little challenging. So this is an interesting one. Madhu asks about using Robot Framework for embedded systems or device testing. So we talked a little bit about mobile. I don't know that much about embedded systems, but basically, if you have a process that has publicly exposed methods, if you have a process that's written in code that has publicly exposed methods, you can interact with it with Robot Framework. So I guess the answer would be yes, but I'm not as familiar with embedded systems as you are. Nested for loops. I don't believe you can do nested for loops in Robot Framework. That would be another reason why you might want to go out and write a piece of code for it. But you know, just in general, if you're looking for performance, nested loops are the first place to go to find bad performance. So just FYI. I'm going to answer a couple more here. We're kind of running out of time, and I want to make sure that you all get to your next thing on time on this Friday afternoon. I'm glad that you've all been with me here. I've enjoyed this quite a bit. Let's see. Okay, and so maybe somebody who I haven't answered yet. Okay, what is the best IDE for this framework? PyCharm, Ride, VS Code, Eclipse, Robot Red. You know what, I don't know all of these. I know that Ride is the original one that they wrote as an IDE specifically for Robot Framework. And it's a good way to get used to how to write keywords and that kind of stuff. But pretty quickly, I think most people move into just text files with an extension like .robot. Which is the best IDE? This is a really tough question for anybody to answer. I think early in your career, or for a lot of people earlier in their career, they'll say, what's the best IDE? And they'll find one that they really like and decide that's the best one. And then you spend a little bit more time in your career and you get onto a system or work for a company where you don't have the luxury of choosing IDEs. And so you get very used to using another one, and you're like, you know what, I can pretty much use whichever one I want. It's more of a preference than a priori truth. The one that I'm using here is VS Code. It has some nice plugins or extensions. The one that I'm using here, I thought this would be installed, and this is installed, okay. The one that I'm using here is called Robot Framework, and it's the thing that does the highlighting for this Robot Framework testing. You know, in terms of IDEs, I always really liked IntelliJ. I don't know about the plugins for Robot Framework for that. There are a lot of good ones out there. Atom, I believe, has a number of plugins for Robot Framework. It's really up to you in what you use. You can even use just a text editor if you would like. I'm just going to check if there are any more questions that just kind of might be interesting to a lot of folks. Libraries for device control. So this is, again, you know, we talked about mobile development. I don't know about the libraries for device control. One of the nice things, though, is that all of the documentation for libraries looks like this. And I say nice in a couple ways. Number one, it's nice in the sense that all the libraries look the same, right? Like, I like that uniformity. I like being able to go in and know exactly where to go. And here's my table of contents. Here's my list of keywords down here somewhere, right? All my shortcuts to keywords, and then I have this keywords section. That's really nice. These are generated by a part of Robot Framework that generates documentation, and of course you generate it from the source code for your keywords. That's a really nice thing. The other thing that I don't like as much is this kind of ugly, but you know, if you're a utility over aesthetics kind of person, this is it, man. It's really good utility. So let's just see real quick if we see something that looks a lot like this for device control. I really thought I turned my phone off. Device control library Robot Framework. Database Appium I mentioned, so it looks like there is an Appium library. So that's one type of device, mobile devices. Appium also has a native interface for Windows, I believe. Let's see, I don't know what kind of devices either. That would probably be helpful to know, is what kind of devices. So there's an operating system one, which could help with devices that have a specific operating system on them. I guess you need to know like what the connection is, and then get a library for the connection as opposed to a library for the device. E-roll, as I'm thinking about this. So for instance, let's say that there's a Bluetooth one. What if there's a Robot Framework Bluetooth library? I don't know anything about Bluetooth either. Yeah, I don't even know what protocol Bluetooth runs. I thought it was the Bluetooth protocol, and that's what you would use. But I don't see anything right away. You see one here for SSH. So if you had, and you see one there for HTTP. So if you had a device connected by HTTP or with SSH enabled, you could get to it that way. And then there's an operating system library to interact with the OS on that device if it has a well-known OS on it. I guess most of those I would think could have Linux, but I really, you're way over my head here, Ural. I don't know the answer. I think that's all we've got time for. This is really good. You guys have asked a lot of wonderful questions. I want to once again mention, if I haven't said it 100 times already, if you like this, if you're interested in learning more about Robot Framework, go out to Test Automation U and take the course. It's free. There are a lot of wonderful courses out there. Here's the URL, testautomationu.com. Get your certification. Make sure to tweet me or put it on LinkedIn so that I can say congrats. I know several of you already have. I hope this works really well for you. It was a little bit off the cuff, but what I wanted to do was just follow on with the release of this course a couple of weeks ago and give you some new tools to use within Robot Framework. There are many, 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 many more. Keep studying, keep learning about it. Maybe we'll have a new course at some point on Test Automation U for more stuff. I don't know. Make sure to tune in for the Tipsy testing in September, and we'll see if I can find some scotch for that. And then the other thing is, when you have recruiting needs, give us a yell. I would like to help you fill your positions. We are very good at it. We've got several searches going on right now. All the time we've got searches going on, and we're doing great at that and giving people some really wonderful opportunities. Also, if you're looking for jobs, go to our jobs board. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it, and I will see you next month. Thank you.